What do you do when you find out that there's a bunch of people who don't like you? Nothing, because that's none of your business. Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and this week, well, I didn't actually expect to make a video. Not a Woolgathering video anyway. But I've been looking after my nephew all week. He's down from Scotland. Well, he was down from Scotland. His mother's parents had him last week, and then I've had him for the majority of this week, apart from the days that I was at work. And today is the first day I've had off work where I haven't been looking after my nephew in a week. So it's been, I've just got out of a bath. And so it's a lot of playing with my hair, trying to hope it'll dry and avoid showing everyone this weird receding hairline. I had my nephew last Sunday, then Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Apart from disappearing off on Thursday to go and visit Joy, but I'll get to that. With the nephew, it has been a lot of taking my brother's toy pickups around the house, pretending that my car is being serviced by a man who's going to take 1,000 years in which to actually get the service done. It's going to cost me millions of pounds, and I'm pretty confident that my nephew has absolutely no conception of vehicular maintenance, but he's 7, we don't need to get into that. All I did find out is that as a 7-year-old, he hates school and he no longer likes reading, which kind of takes away everything that I could do with him. We used to read all the time, so it's a bit of a shame, but maybe he'll get back into it when he's an adult. Here's hoping, because otherwise I have absolutely no way in which to converse with this child. Anyway, let's turn this around. If we're going to have dinner ladies in the background, it may as well be facing the correct way. I won't lie, I have found it somewhat more difficult to look after my nephew this week. I have not been the best health-wise. The pain that I had mentioned in my previous Woolgathering video has not yet abated, and thus it really limited what we could do. He also didn't want to leave the house, and I'd had ideas to go for walks down the canal. I couldn't take Sally anywhere because she's currently in season, and I couldn't think of anywhere that would be quiet enough. And so that leaves me feeling somewhat restless. But hopefully on one of my days off this week that doesn't, because I've got overtime this week as well, it's a strange month, is July, in terms of work. But hopefully I'll be able to disappear off up the canal myself at some point and just, yeah, maybe it'll be different to experience that quiet and that silence again. Otherwise, due to having my nephew here, when he's left, which has been after a full day of having him for about 10 to 11 hours, I haven't felt like doing anything. I retire to my bedroom for an hour or so and just enjoy the quiet, because as much as I love my nephew, he is loud from the moment of arrival until departure. Also, I suppose more difficult because I've not really had to look after him in a very long time, and when you're not seeing a child for so long, you can't really figure out, well, what worked before isn't going to work now. I mentioned some of the things that I'd had to say to him when he'd done being naughty, let's say. People said, well, you can't say that to a 7-year-old, and I was thinking, well, that's how things were said to me, such as when he was having a bit of a tantrum and he chose to start smashing things up. And I said, we don't all have the money that you have. So if something gets broken, it's broken forever around here. We can't just pay to fix it. And I got told, well, you shouldn't say that to a 7-year-old. I was like, well, I was brought up knowing that our finances were low. And I was thinking, is it only poor folk that have their children worrying about money? Am I currently working with a lot of, because this was said at work, am I working with a lot of people who were always brought up rather rich and entitled, so it was never a worry for them, so they then went into thinking, or Was I wrong to mention that I didn't have the money, that if he broke something in my house, then that was it, it was gone forever and I'd no longer have it? I don't know. But these are the thoughts that I have. Otherwise, it was great to see him, but I am glad to finally have a day to just rest and kind of decompose in my own room. It also means that, as I say, the reading hasn't been getting done. I did manage to get my pages of the Karamazov brothers by Dostoevsky, which I'm buddy reading with Emily of Novel Novels. I did manage to get the pages read for this, but I'm behind again because I haven't had a chance to go back and read any due to the fact that I've been at work. But hopefully I'll be able to catch up one day. I don't know. I don't have the book here, but I am also reading The Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien again. I don't understand why it has grabbed my attention this time, but when I was 9 years old, maybe, I can't remember when the first film came out. I think I was 9 because I remember being in year 5 and there was this girl who was reading the bind-up, well, the actual Lord of the Rings, which was the one that was green and it had the illustration of Gandalf on the cover. And I asked my parents for that for Christmas. I got it. I don't own it anymore because my copy got absolutely ruined, but I could never read it because I found the prose incredibly dry. Then my cousin bought me a set where it was all separate because he had that as well. And again, I found the experience incredibly dry. I managed to read The Hobbit and enjoyed the experience of doing that. But whenever I would try to read The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, even when I listened to it on audiobook a few years ago, I could never get into it. Go back a few weeks and out of nowhere, this hankering to read The Fellowship of the Ring came into my mind, and no idea why. Tolkien's worlds I've always thought they're there. I understand why. I understand he has a lot of fans. I'm not one of them, that's how I've always been. And then out of nowhere, this hankering to read it arose within me. I found a copy was at the shop, so I borrowed this, and I've said once I finish it, I will return it, and then I'll borrow the next one, and then I'll return it, and then I'll borrow the next one, and I'll return it. But I have thoroughly enjoyed the experience reading it this time. It is not as... well, it's slow. But I'm taking everything in, whereas I could not remember half of the stuff that had been said in this book, and I couldn't remember any of the story from the time that I have read or listened to it in the past, and yet this time I'm taking it in and I'm finding myself really surprised that this stuff is in there, and I'm finding myself shocked at how fast I'm reading it, although technically it's still somewhat slow. But I do wonder, is it because this year, after March, I found that I'm preferring the slower, more thoughtful reads as opposed to more modern texts that move rather quickly? Do I appreciate the more meandering tone at the moment, and therefore that is why this book is working for me and appealing to my sensibilities, because the books that I am enjoying are somewhat different than they were at the time when I first tried to read this or listen to it. I don't know, but I find it a strange anomaly indeed. It hasn't made me want to go and revisit any of the other books that I haven't liked previously. It's a phenomenon that happens sometimes for me. I don't tend to want to mention a certain book series that was incredibly popular when I was a child, but I know that I mentioned before how it was the mainstay of my childhood, the series that I read and I reread, and the first book within this series I struggled to get through when I first tried to read it, and then whenever I went back to it, it ended up becoming a favourite of mine. And I wonder, is that something that's happened with The Lord of the Rings? Have I just reached a time in which I'm able to appreciate it more? With The 13th Tale as well, and Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, we have two books there that I kept trying to get into, couldn't get into, and then eventually just had that eureka moment where I found that they were exactly what I was looking for. It makes no sense. Not to me, anyway. As I say, I visited my friend Joy this week, if only to get a copy of her new book. This is Morgan by Joy Winkler, and last year I think you will have remembered me saying that I was critiquing a friend's book. This was that book. It had a different title at the time, but the title has since been changed, and I am very much looking forward to going back and reading it to see whether the suggestions that I made when I critiqued this book have been taken on, and also to see how it has been edited and improved. I'll read Joy's blurb. Morgan grows up believing that she is an evil child worthy of punishment. Why else would her father disown her? Why else would her mother not answer her letters? When she meets her blind grandmother Grace, she's delighted that at last she has a true family, but sadly her happiness is short-lived. Grace dies and it seems to be Morgan's fault. It's only when she becomes a mother herself and is forced to abandon her own son that the true story is revealed. This is a novel that enlists magic, mythology and fantasy to uncover family secrets with their misconceptions and regrets. Making their presence felt are the truths and lies, the what-ifs and the skeletons in the cupboard who all poke their noses through the narrative, giving the writing an unusual, original and stimulating style. Joy employs fairy tale and folk tale within the novel to help further the story along and provide some sort of allegory for the novel itself and for the way that Morgan's life is going. These fairy tale aspects and superstitions also enter into the narrative in a way that I found suited my sensibilities and was, again, to mention Joanne Harris, somewhat similar to the way people view Vianna Rocha in Chocolat and that series. If you would like to help Joy, who is the former Cheshire Poet Laureate, a poet within her own right, who, if you do live in the north of England, you may have seen recent poetry dramas of hers because they did get toured around. They were Lightning Under Their Skirts and Town. If you'd like to acquire a copy, then I will leave the link to Amazon in the description. However, if you would like to purchase a copy directly from the author, you can get in touch with me and I will pass the information on to Joy. One of my customers didn't recognise me on Saturday. Now, I knew that she'd forgotten who I was, despite us conversing with one another for 6 years now. I knew she'd forgotten who I was because last time that she came in was the first time she'd been in a very long time. You know, everything going on in the world. And she was giving me rather filthy looks. You know, as though I had taken my own job. She thought that I had come in as a usurper and taken the job of the shop assistant that she actually spoke to. I thought things would end there. You know, maybe give me a few dirty looks and just whatever. But this week she came into the car park and I greeted her as I always used to greet her, you know, said her name. And then she gives me this funny look again. Now, I don't have my mask on this time. I had my mask on the first time, so I forgave her. And she gives me this funny look again. And then she goes, I'm sorry, but do I know you? Now, I know, and I say this a lot, I know that I've lost weight. But I still think that I'm recognisable. Yes, she might have last seen me when I was somewhat heavier. But I'm still poor enough that I'm wearing the same shoes. Ugh. And I said who I was. And even then, she pretended like she didn't know me. And I got to wondering, is there something that I did to offend her? It wouldn't be the first time. Now, this is where I discover that certain people, certain customers, don't like me. And the reason I've been told is simply because I'm common. And honestly, I didn't really care. It's one of those things that I've always lived by, like I said at the start of this video, is that I can't control what anybody else thinks of me, so I don't really mind what anybody else thinks of me. Now, say someone went and made a huge attack on my character that was completely false and made that public and had people think in a certain type of way, maybe I'd feel something about it. I don't know, because that feels somewhat dramatic and that feels like something that I would have to get involved in. And I don't know whether you know this, but I never really liked conflict anyway, even when I was little. It's not something I've ever really cared for, is conflict. And that feels like something where conflict would happen. There are people I also dislike, and I don't really let them know that I dislike them. I don't tend to tell other people this, because there have been experiences in my life where I've recognised that although there is someone that I might dislike, there are probably like 1,000 other people who like that person and who they have helped and been charitable towards. It's none of my business to share that opinion, so I'm still civil with those people. Finding out these few people that don't like me, that's kind of like, well, it don't really change anything, because, you know, you can kind of recognise when somebody doesn't particularly like you. Some people, customers, they'll give you this look. It's a bit like, oh, well, could I have the other person instead? Well, yeah, sure. It's fine. I'm not really a forward-facing person anyway. I quite like being in the kitchen or in the back room, just sorting through stuff. So yeah, I'll get you the other person. Not that anyone's actually done that. It's just sometimes they'll ask, is such and such it? No, they're not. You've got to deal with me today. I had that on the phone, you know. A few weeks back, someone rang and they listed every single other staff member and then started listing volunteers. And I was like, no, you've come through to me. I am in charge today. I can help you. I have worked within this charity for 13 years as a volunteer, and now I'm staff. As staff, I've been here for 8 years. I can help you. They decided I couldn't help them. And it's fine. And I bring it here simply as a discussion point, simply as a way of raising awareness that sometimes you just have to accept that you aren't liked by everybody. This forthcoming week is going to see me at work tomorrow, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday, where I will be the only staff member, which means I have to work a tiny bit harder. Tomorrow I will probably sequester myself to the steamer unless we get a huge donation of books, in which case I'm begging off and looking at the books instead. I haven't had a chance to watch any of the films that people recommended to me because I've had my nephew, which means that the only film I have watched is Toy Story 3. Great film. I'd forgotten how much I like that one. And the only book that I've listened to was The Fifth Elephant by Terry Pratchett, and I've got to tell you, that's up there as one of my new favourites. It is one of the City Watch books, and these were the ones that I never thought I'd enjoy, but this one, I'm always surprised when Pratchett discusses social change and gender and the gender norms, and he challenges them, and I'm always surprised that he was doing that in his fiction, especially when people start going on about woke adaptations of his work, and I just think, well, it's all there. He's always challenging the norms within society within his work, and he does it in a humorous fashion. So if someone was going to come to me and say they had an issue with a gritty adaptation of one of Pratchett's works because it was gritty, then yes, I'd agree with that, because they're supposed to be somewhat whimsical, but there's still that challenge there towards the norms. So what can you do? People, it's one of those things. I think that people at the moment have this tendency to want to get angry and offend. They want to either be angry and offended or get angry and offensive. And it's really weird for me, and I can't cope with it. I spent a lot of time with some very involved discussions and everything. I've reached this point where I need I still need silence. I still need quiet. I still need to take things easy and slow. And unfortunately, I am living in a world that wants everything done 3 months ago and wants everything to move faster than the Earth can possibly tilt on its axis. It's a shame. But The Fifth Elephant is fantastic, and it sees the City Watch in this investigation to find this lost mythical object. The coffee's now arrived because the mother started having a phone call, so I had to wait. Sam Bimes disappears to he ends up investigating this lost sword of scone. Stone of scone? I could never figure out how that was being said. I listened to it as an audiobook. This time it was narrated by Stephen Briggs. It's weird with this narratorial change because for so long it's been Nigel Planer. And I can't say for sure when it changed over to Stephen Briggs, but this is the first time that I noticed it properly. Then you had Carrot and Angua doing something related to the werewolves, and then you had the person in charge being a bit of a dictator and following the rules and counting flaming sugar cubes, so that set off something, and that was seeing a dissolution of the watch back in Ankh-Morpork. And I just really enjoyed how strong and built up this felt and how it showcased so many different characters from the City Watch stories. And then after finishing that, I went straight into listening to The Truth, which is the next book and is the first book that I've heard is with the guy who's with the Industrial Revolution and the start of the printing press in Ankh-Morpork. And so far I've been seeing a lot of hints towards Dickens' works that I'm going to research because I don't know whether they're intentionally there or whether I'm reading too much into things. Writing-wise, I haven't got anything done. And I'd feel bad about it if I didn't only have 15,000 words left. Everything's planned now and I can see the finish line, and usually I'd be rushing towards it, but like I say, I've reached this point where I think that there's something freeing in not a lot of people knowing that my books exist. And I know that I want to have this career as a writer. And had my books been somewhat more widely known, and was there actual demand for them, then maybe right now I would be rushing. And I know that I felt this certain tension years ago when I felt like I had to rush to get the second book out. And then, like I say, the second book was unsuccessful, which meant that I didn't even move into the next Doris book straight after that. I wrote the children's book and An Heir to Murder first, and then I moved into Doris Ahoy after 18 months away, finished that, went back to An Heir to Murder, released that, pandemic happened, so then I'm just been writing for over a year now with nobody apart from my mother reading the book, and getting no feedback from the writers at the writers group, no feedback from a friend I've always shared Doris with. And so this time round it does feel very much like it's just me, Doris and Harold finishing off their story, and it feels very much like it's been between us to get this story told. And I know they're fictional characters, but you know, I have now been writing with them for 10 years, so what can you do? I did say to Joy when we had this chat at her house, I think that I will be working on the charity shop book next, and it's going to be the first time that I have written a male protagonist. Well, I say that. This is where even other people don't understand me, because this Doris books are told from the perspective of Harold. Harold is a man. And I always forget that it's the first time it's not the first time I've written a male protagonist, because Harold is the protagonist of the Doris books. But Doris is such a strong character, I always think of them as having a female lead, and that Harold is the side character. He's almost like Doris's Dr. Watson. Whereas this guy, in the next book, I feel like it's going to be a third person thing. It could end up being first person, but at the moment I'm thinking it's third person. I've written some of the conversations he's going to have, because that tends to be what happens. We get all the dialogue first, and that's how the characters come to me, through the dialogue. And that's been happening, and the plan's there, and it's somewhat connected to both the Doris and Harold books, but no, not Harold, the Doris and the Alice books. But it's not coming out before Alice #2. The second Alice book will be the next book released after the final Doris book, I think. Then we'll go, I think I want to do 2 Alice books before I release this book that I plan to write after the Doris book. And yeah, so in about 6 years, I imagine you'll finally get to read that. Maybe that's a reason to write faster. All the plans that I have. Otherwise, there's nothing happening this week. Staff members are off at work. I am short on a few volunteers, which means that I either have to move some around or I'll just be working a bit harder than usual. We'll see how things go. What have you been up to since last we spoke? I mean, one thing, I just remembered one thing that I wanted to talk about. The Nintendo GameCube. I got it off my shelf so that my nephew could play it, and I've accidentally ended up playing Sonic Heroes again at the age of 28. Sonic Flaming Heroes. Switching the telly on and just having 15 minutes, because I can't cope with a video game for longer than 15 minutes. I feel like I've wasted an age with just 5, so I get through 15 minutes and I don't know, I like it a bit, I won't lie. And that's been another way to relax. I still don't get video games and I still don't understand the compulsions behind them, but the GameCube, the Sonic Heroes, just a nice little bit of blissful nostalgia. I can't really think of what else to talk about, so I'm going to leave you there. What have you been up to since last we spoke? What are you reading? What are you writing? What are you watching? What are you listening to? I have been listening to Laura Mvula and Mimi Webb. They're the ones who I've been listening to a lot at the moment. I've also been going back and revisiting Moona, because Will Young released his cover of Crying on the Bathroom Floor this week, and whilst I feel like it's a nice homage to Moona, I just want everyone in the world to hear Moona's version of this song. I've been listening to a lot of music recently, a lot, because I can't really find the strength to do anything, so I just switch the music on and just sit there, kind of like a corpse or a zombie, just listening to music. I hope that you got something out of this video, even if it was sheer boredom. And until next time, that is all